Okay, those people go back to your seat. You'll see your slip.
Actually, there's some teachers who might have wanted to come. What else up there? I think we should start them later. Yeah, you should start. So, Dad, the way we've been telling you the story is actually your little sister, Hannah, is telling about her story. And now she's going to introduce you. I've been telling you this for a so I'm going to talk as if I'm Dora Hannah Gezel. Okay, now I'm introducing my handsome brother, Sergeant Kleinerman. My brother, which you'll learn, we're not going to talk about this part of the story, but after we safely came to America, my brother became a soldier in the American Army. He went back to Europe, and he helped the American Army win the Germans, and he even helped free the concentration camps. I'm not going to have nothing. But that's a different story. Because the purpose of our class right now is to learn about childhood in Germany at that time. Okay? Let me just see if there's anything else that let's go two ahead, Liana.
You didn't mention that my dear sister ate all the candy out of my Zuckertüte.
Right. Do you remember we learned about the Zuckertüte, those big things that we had those? Here, I have the picture. Yes.
I thought I was hiding mine, but she found it, and when I found it again, it was empty. And that's my sister. She takes very great pride in the fact that she took all my candies. Okay.
Is Tali's head in the way, or can you get it? It's okay? Sorry.
Oh yeah, here. Zuckertüte. Some of them were bigger than this. They were taller than the person that was holding it.
Wow.
Well.
Okay, you can start. You're on. You can start.
Okay, you probably know your teacher is my sister. I'm the father-in-law. I was going to say,
right.
Not my mother. I'm the father-in-law. She's married. Your teacher's married to my son, and that gives both of us the same name, Kleinerman. Mrs. Klein, Mr. Kleinerman. Now, one thing I want to say, this is now a time when everybody talks about the Holocaust. There's memorial meetings. Some places have speakers that can talk what happened to them during the Holocaust. I'm not a Holocaust survivor. I am not. I lived in Germany before the Holocaust. I left, it got pretty bad already, but it wasn't the Holocaust. The Holocaust was very, very bad, and that happened after I had left. So I want you to know that I'm not a Holocaust survivor. Actually, when we lived in Germany, my family, that's my sister, my parents and I, things were pretty good. I had some wonderful memories, but little by little they changed. And some of the changes were because the government made changes. Some of the changes were because the people that lived there started to take different attitudes. If there's anybody that doesn't understand what I'm talking about, please raise your hand, and I'll try to answer questions. But don't answer questions which have ask questions which have nothing to do with what I'm talking about. So as I said, things little by little got worse. And that was, again, I mentioned before things got very bad. What happened, for instance? You know what Schritte is?
Yeah.
All of a sudden, Schritte was forbidden. You couldn't, no shochet could work. There were some that worked on their own a little bit, but most, you couldn't go to a store and buy meat or meat products because there was no Schritte. So you learned to live with fish and herring and things like that. And I got to love herring.
You know.
You get to love it. But what I don't understand is that in my own family, I have grandchildren that don't eat fish. They don't like fish. How they ever got into my family, I don't know. another thing that happened is, all of a sudden, Jews were not allowed to go swimming in public swimming pools. I never learned how to swim. I grew up in Dresden. Does anybody have parents that lived in Dresden? Yes?
In Germany.
Yeah, in the city. Now Dresden is one of the big cities in Germany, but it didn't have much of a Jewish population. Well, about 5,000 Jews living in Dresden, compared to some other cities which were not much bigger than Dresden, but had many, many more Jews. So Dresden had just 2 synagogues, and one of them was Ashkenazi Orthodox, and the other one was what you would call a temple. It had an organ, music,
It was reformed.
but it was a very big, beautiful building. It was one of the most beautiful buildings in all of Dresden. That was the temple. I, in my family, of course, went to the Orthodox School, which was not a building by itself. The Orthodox School consisted of one big floor in a building that had many other enterprises. There are other businesses in that building. It's just that we had one floor in a building that was not just the Orthodox School. And so we hardly ever got into the temple. The only time that people like myself from an Orthodox family that went into the temple was the first night of Sukkot, because they had a huge sukkah, and very few people had a sukkah in those days. So we went to the sukkah because they had a beautiful kiddush, and we got some of the kiddush, and that was once a year that we were in the big temple. Now the big temple was, you all heard of Kristallnacht, I'm sure. When all synagogues practically in Germany were burned to the floor. The temple was burned to the floor. My synagogue, that was in a building which housed many other businesses. Not that we were a business, but it was a synagogue that just owned one floor in a building that had other tenants. There, they did not burn it down, because that would have burned down a lot of the neighborhood. It was in a downtown business area, and what they did there was they destroyed everything that they could get hands on. That's, when I say they, I mean the Nazis. So my tallis that I had gotten just 1 year earlier when I was bar mitzvah, my tallis was burned. And so all the Sforim, all the Sefer Torahs were burned. But the building was not destroyed. I mentioned I had a tallis that I was given the year before in my bar mitzvah. Let me say something about my bar mitzvah, which is probably different than any shul that you know of. In my bar mitzvah, when there was a bar mitzvah boy, you did not read the entire Sedra. In those days, that was not done. Here now, in all the yeshivas and in many day schools, the boys learn how to read an entire Sedra. That was not the case. Another thing that was different was when it came to the Haftorah. In my synagogue where I grew up, they said, there are boys, and they didn't mean me, they're boys that don't have a good voice, that would be ashamed if they were to start singing with Trump, the Haftorah. So the law was, you could only read the Haftorah. Read it like you read from a book. The only time that they allowed you to sing was for the maftir, that little bit of maftir.
So not to embarrass the other boys who couldn't sing well.
That's exactly right. what else can I say about my hometown, Dresden? I really remember some very good times in Dresden. Before things got bad, I was frequently playing with my neighbors, Goyim. Make no difference. One thing I remember about Dresden, by the way, you probably, if you haven't read so, Dresden was the city in Germany that got most bombs during World War II. It was the most destroyed city, but it was a beautiful city before it was destroyed. It was known as the garden city of Europe. There were so many beautiful parks. And after the bombing, there was so much damage that it was referred to now as the Green City instead of the Garden City. Why was it called the Green City? Because the Germans, when they cleaned up all the mess after the bombing, they just planted grass. And so there were many, many areas of just grass that made the city look green when you flew over. So it became the Green City. One thing about Dresden that I still want to mention that I remember very fondly, when winter came, can I say Christmas? When Christmas came, usually the temperature got cold enough that whatever was wet froze. And many of the streets, all the streets actually, had a cover of ice that lasted from Christmas until many months, until about this time of the year. You couldn't see the asphalt, the street surface, because there was ice on it. And you learned how to walk on ice without slipping. Another thing that I remember, Dresden had many public tennis courts. You walked 4 blocks and there was a tennis court on the street for the public, for the use of the public. What they did is when it got cold, they put water on the tennis court and it froze, and all of a sudden you had you could go ice skating. And I went ice skating. I had ice skating shoes. That was a fond memory of Germany, that just on every 4th corner you came to an area where you could ice skating. Okay, I talked about Dresden. I grew up in Dresden. I left Dresden when I was 14 and a half years old. I grew up in Dresden, but I was not born in Dresden. I was born in Berlin, which was the capital, the biggest city in Germany. My mother comes from Berlin. Her parents lived in Berlin, and in those days, I don't know whether it was true for every family, but for quite a few families that I know of, the mother of the first child would want to have her child born in the house of her mother. That meant that my mother decided when I was to be born, she would take a train, go to Berlin, and I was born in the house of my grandparents.
No hospital.
So I should talk a little bit about my grandparents. My grandfather, Olav Shalom, was a Gera Chassid. Have you heard about Hasidim? You know that there are different Hasidim, and one of the big Hasidic families are the Gera. And my grandfather, Olav Shalom,
Hasidei Gur, it's called Hasidei Gur.
was
Hasidei
a...
Gur?
I hope you follow me. I'm not used to talking 10-year-old, but I'm trying my best. I'm trying my best. My grandfather was what you would call the senior shochet for the Orthodox community in Berlin. And he was a Gera Chosset. He and his wife were introduced to each other by a famous Gera, the Gera Rebbe, the Sfas Emes. He was referred to as the Sfas Emes. He introduced my grandparents to each other. And it was a custom in those days that many of the rabbis who lived in Poland, which was not Germany but Poland, would, when it came to summertime, would go to a kur, to a place where they can relax and get very healthy. And that place was in another country, Czechoslovakia. But the Gera Chosset and then his son would travel from Poland, first to Berlin, to Germany, and then go to Czechoslovakia. It so happened I was born the 29th of June, which is just the beginning of the summer, and when, as I said before, I was in Berlin to have my bris. The son of the Gera Rebbe, who was by that time the Gera Rebbe, and he was known as the Beit Yisrael, was in Berlin, and you can believe me, I'm the only survivor from my bris. I don't know of any other people that attended my bris than I did, but I don't remember much.
You don't remember much for your friend. And you got a gift. I know that you have this in
So
your house.
I was given, so I'm told that I got a gift from the Gera Rebbe who was at my bris, and he gave me a silver thimble.
Thimble is something you use in sewing to protect your finger. And he has this, but we weren't able to bring it from his house. You can see a picture of it.
That is a very valuable gift. I treasure it.
And you took it out of Germany.
Yes.
I just want to stop now for some questions. Mr. Kleinerman talked a little about what life is like in Germany now. Does anyone have any questions about life there? What life was like for a boy about your age, a little older?
Was it scary?
Yeah, because it's scary. That's what I want to know. Maybe you could
Well,
talk
I
about
can
some
talk a little bit about what was my life like when I was in Germany.
Right, and when the feelings of beginning of anti-Semitism, what you saw.
There were, what I would say, 3 activities that I was very much involved in. One of them is to go to a cheder. Now, a cheder was a place where you learn Chumash, Tanakh, and only boys like myself that come from Orthodox families attended. And we had in Dresden a very young rabbi by the name of Rabbi Königshofer, who did most of the teaching at the cheder. Now, who's here from England, or whose parents? Then you heard of the Gateshead Yeshiva? The famous yeshiva in England. What the reason I mention that, my teacher, Rabbi Königshofer, after the war, I met him again. He was one of the Rosh Yeshiva at Gateshead. So I met him again, but at that time he was high up.
I think they want to hear also, where did you start feeling anti-Semitism?
Well, yeah, okay. When I had to walk from my house where we lived to where I attended the cheder, I had to, on the street that I had to walk on one side of the street was a sports arena, a very huge sports arena, where there were war games, but also where there was a lot of activity by the young Hitler youth. They were marching and with drums and with other instruments, made a lot of noise, and they carried flags. And it was the custom that if you saw a flag with a swastika, you had to salute, stand still, salute. So on the way to go to the cheder, I always crossed the street, went to the other side, so I wouldn't have to salute. I remember that. Okay, so much for going to the cheder. Another one of activities that I remember as a boy was to belong to a Zionist organization. And the religious Zionist organization was called Bachat. That stands for Brit Chalutzim Datim, which is really was a kind of Bnei Akiva. What is now Bnei Akiva, at least in Germany, was Brit Chalutzim Datim, and what did we do? We had gatherings, we danced the hora, we went on tiulim, and what I should say also here, there was another Zionist organization for young people in Dresden, as it was in many other cities, and that was Hashomer Hatzair. Now there is a, let's not say, Bnei Akiva and Hashomer Hatzair don't get along well.
Shomer Hatzair is a non-religious Sofim or youth movement.
But where I grew up, and this may have been true only for where I grew up, I can't speak for others here, we had friends in Hashomer Hatzair. We did things together, we had tiulim together. I remember one time we went to Tashlich together, so it's different than it is now. We got along splendidly with the people that were members of Brit Chalutzim Datim, Bnei Akiva. As they were a little older, their aim was to go to Palestine. In those days there was no Israel, there was a Palestine.
Even if you look at this card here, I'm sorry I'm interrupting you, right? It says here, Keren Torah Ba'avodah. This is 2 years before Bnei Akiva even started. And here's their membership card. Who belongs to Bnei Akiva or Ezra? You have a card, some of you? Some of you do, some of you don't. And here was their sign.
You got one.
Okay? So you can come up and look at this later.
So, in order to go
Later.
to Israel, there was an institution called Hachshara. Hachshara was sort of an area or a farm where people that wanted to go to Palestine were trained what they should expect to find in Palestine. There was a Hachshara training in Germany, one. In England there was more than one. I know there was one in Scotland, but the biggest one was in Denmark. And recently, well, a couple of years ago, I was here at Kibbutz Lavi. Anybody here? And there I met people that had been in Denmark and Hachshara. People that were not young anymore, but they remember being trained to go to Palestine on the Hachshara in Denmark. I should also say from Dresden, from my hometown, several of the people that were teenagers or 18, 19 years old did go to Palestine. That was before the Holocaust. I want to mention again, before the Holocaust. And